Hello and welcome to season 5, episode 1 of Dualistic Unity. I am really enjoying and appreciating being able to experience everything that I am without quite so much distortion, without quite so much concern, because we're always experiencing everything that we are. It's just the degree to which we're concerned about what it means about a fucking fiction, about a made up idea that we keep telling ourselves. So, without telling myself so much of that, or really just running back to the certainty, the false certainty that I've always clung to, I'm just left with what's left, which is all just me. And in that recognition, there isn't quite so much concern or reason to be concerned. Comes up from time to time, but even that is an aspect of experiencing everything that I am. And so I've been enjoying that experience thoroughly.
I have been enjoying sharing that experience, an experience that for such a long period of my life was something that truly felt like it was only happening for me. And that was okay. That became okay because my opinion of that was irrelevant. Even if it was just me understanding that I was investing in an illusion, at least there was less of the suffering that went with that illusion. And so it's incredible to watch you and the other people in our community and in our audience and in our groups experiencing and expressing these parts of their journey that feel so much more free because I can hear in their words things that I have said and continue to say to some degree. Wow, it's crazy. Season 5, just incredible. I just want to take a moment to welcome the listener. If you are a new listener, we're going to try and cover some of the things that we've talked about in previous seasons, but we're going to do so in kind of an overarching way where it's not going to be as detailed as it should be. So I encourage you to go back to season 1, episode 1. Go through all of season 1 and season 2. If you really want to get the details about the concepts and the insights that we're going to try and express in this episode, we really did work on them and build on them throughout the first 2 seasons of this podcast. You can keep up with the current episodes. You can look at the different formats of episode that we have. So just to give you a quick breakdown, we have our classic episodes, which are always numbered season 1, episode 2, so on and so forth. We have our raw episodes, which were introduced in season 4. These episodes are unedited and basically whatever it is Andrew and I are thinking about at the time of recording. They're also live streamed, so you can check them out at twitch.tv/dualistic unity. Those episodes, by no means do you have to keep up with if you're just getting familiar with the podcast, because we bounce around with ideas and concepts that we have fully fleshed out in earlier episodes. And so if there's anything that I would recommend, it's going through the quote unquote classic episodes first, just to get familiar with the conversation. Also, jump onto our community Discord, where there are 800 plus people right now having this conversation, exploring different insights, questioning certain concepts. It's an ongoing discussion that is invaluable if you're interested in this discussion whatsoever. So there's that. The classic episodes are definitely where the meat and bones of what we're talking about basically is laid out in a scaffolded kind of manner. There's some strategy behind it in the discussion was unfolding at the time for Andrew and for myself to some degree. And so you'll get more out of that. Whereas if you try and tune into each and every episode of Raw, it's not necessarily all going to land. You might get some good value out of it, but it's not the same process as the classic episodes. That said, we also have movie reviews. We have over a dozen movie reviews now, which is crazy to me because they're so much fun to make. Now that we're in season 5, our schedule is changing a bit. We're going to have more movie reviews coming out. We're also going to have a Masters of the Metaphysical series coming out where we talk to practitioners in spirituality and religion and whatnot, and get them to come onto the show and talk to us a little bit about the practicality of what it is they're talking about or what they believe, and how maybe we can find an insight or two from within that, hopefully as gently as possible. And just a few more things because I want to celebrate. We're in season 5. This is crazy. We have over 200 episodes in general. That's including classic and raw and movie reviews. That's a lot of episodes. So, like I said, if you stick to the classic episodes, it's only 78. 78 classic episodes to catch up to where we are right now, which is a lot easier than 200. But if you like movies and you want a conscious movie review or something that is looking at the deeper aspects of a movie, do check out our movie review series, which you can find on YouTube or in podcast form. We have had 5 workshops, which are all available on our website. We have had 2 retreats already. We have 2 more already sold out, a third one that's almost sold out in August. It's incredible how much this has grown and continues to grow. And so I'm going to stop rambling and pass it over to Andrew here in just a second. But what I really wanted to discuss today are the fundamentals of this conversation, because it's been a long time since we started getting into the fundamentals and asking the most basic and important of questions. And so I thought we could start there. Specifically, Andrew, again, 200 episodes in. And not only 200 episodes, there are over 200 group discussions and videos of those group discussions on our Patreon page. So there's several hundred hours of group discussions and insights as well for anybody who's looking for it. Patreon.com/dualistic unity. I'll get on to the question now. What is the ego? What are we dealing with?
Let's fucking go. I am all right. I'm even more. I told him before because he's been telling me I got a little bit of things I want to rediscuss. And it's really fun. Like this is I love talking about this. So and yeah, with everything. I mean, season 5, fucking A. Holy shit. It's wild how much. And I could put myself back in that spot of recording early on in season 1, like at my desk in my New York City apartment and feeling that. And yeah, because it was all kind of around the time I was trying mushrooms for the first time. I moved back to New York after being away for about a year. And Dualistic Unity started all kind of at the same time. So it's wild that it's been is it over? Yeah, over a year and a half now. That's pretty incredible. But back to the question. What is the ego? The ego is your idea of yourself, your identity, what you think you are. Any idea that you ever settle upon is the ego. So it gets this bad rep in our society, but it isn't a bad thing at all. It's a tool, just like social media is a tool. It has the potential to be taken too far, be abused, be used in a way that is destructive, or it can be used as a way that is constructive. And so our ego, our idea of ourself, is merely a tool. I use this example a lot, but I think it's very practical. If you were in a group of people and no one had an idea of themselves, no one had a name, everything just was what was. Everyone went by you and me, which we do anyway, but when it's appropriate, we utilize an idea, a concept, a name in order to differentiate iterations of myself. So if you were in a group of people and no one had a name and you said, "Hey, you," everyone turns around. That's not very convenient. It's like a pain in the ass. You got to run all the way up to the group and like grab your friend and be like, "I mean, you." So we implement names and an ability to differentiate iterations of myself. And so that is kind of the seedling for the ego, in a sense, that then we build on top of that an idea, a story. It's no longer just a tool, just a label. Now everything you do means something about this story. So the story is always being built, maintained, chipped away at, built up again. And it's how much we are invested into that story that kind of dictates our experience, how seriously we take it. But the ego is not a bad thing. I want to make that very clear. It is not a bad thing at all. It is our ticket to experience. Without the ego, we don't have the ability to have an experience in the illusion of division that isn't actually divided. But without that idea of ourself, without the label, at least, because the idea isn't necessary in order to have the experience, but it's always right there. So it's very important. We use terms like weeding the garden or staying on the ball to recognize that any idea that you settle upon isn't the reality of what you are. And the more you invest into that idea, into the ego, into the story, the more difficult it is to stay in reality, which is just remaining in uncertainty here and now, because there is no certainty. So there is no idea you can settle upon that can adequately define you. It's just that that uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. And so we run to the story in order to temporarily convince ourselves that we can avoid the uncertainty and the discomfort that comes with it. There is a temporary cessation with a larger cost being the investment in that story taken as truth, because then every situation you go into, your value is on the line, because our value is dictated based on how we see that story, not even how other people see us, but how we think other people see us, as well as how other people see us, and or how we think of ourselves. And that story just kind of runs amok and is never actually the truth of what you are. So it's using it as a tool, but not taking it so far. But yeah, that's what I got for now on ego. I'll pass back to Ray.
Okay. So, and I want to play devil's advocate in this episode. So everything that you just said, I understand. And most of the people who would follow through the last 4 seasons are right on board with. But for somebody who's just coming to this, I get the part what you're saying in terms of the idea of myself is not the truth. I'm not necessarily as worthless as I might think. I'm not necessarily how people perceive me. And that feels really good. I like that. That's easy to apply. That's something that I can immediately look at my current suffering and go, okay, that's great. So a lot of that might be exacerbated by how much I'm concerned about these things that I'm afraid people see in me. Okay, so I get that. So I'm not what I think I am. But what about everything else? What about what I think you are? What about what I think the earth is? What about what I think the universe is? Because you said the experience of division, the perception of division. Now, if I'm new to this conversation, I don't understand what you mean, because I'm used to looking at myself as a body, right? Like there's you and there's me, and we're having very different experiences. So what do you mean by the perception of division?
That is a fantastic question. I appreciate you asking that one. So, and I have a number of sort of go-to, I don't know, examples, analogies, things. And for this one of my favorite ones is cells in a body, or even parts of our body. And so for this situation, you have the perception that you are divided from me. The reality is the space in between us, which has been proven by science and us, is that everything is made out of the same base elements. You, air in between us, me, everything you see, same base element. So it's our conceptual ideas that divide those things. So for this example, take the body. And so, you have your finger, and down at the other end of your body, you have your toe. Are those divided? Technically speaking, no. But we have this idea of them being separate, but they aren't actually separate. And if you want to be more specific, your finger versus your hand versus your arm, where's the division there? There isn't. And you can perceive division, which is why you can point to a finger and say that's the finger, and you're like, yeah, I don't know, it's somewhere around that last knuckle that it's divided. But there's no division, there's no gap in that. It's conceptual, it's made up essentially. And so when it comes to us, it's the same thing. Like, you are reality. Everything you're walking through is reality. It's all you. And we come up with these labels for things that allow us to take that perception of division very seriously. And a follow-up that people always go to with this is, okay, well then why, when someone punches me, you don't feel it if you're me? And it's the same as in this example, the finger versus the toe. You stub your toe, does your finger feel it? No. I mean, it does as the body, if it recognizes what the reality of it actually is. but it's doesn't mean that that experience is going to be had by it. Or it's like on a tree, the leaves on one side are getting sun, the leaves on the other side are in the shadows. Well, okay, so if the leaves are all the tree, then why can't the leaves on the other side feel the warmth? Because they're not experiencing the sun in the same way. They're not experiencing, but it does not mean in any way, shape, or form that both of those leaves are not still the tree. And so that's what the this recognition comes down to. And there's a depth to that. Like it's all kind of comes down to a core in a sense, and we build all of these ideas on top of it and are looking at everything as conceptual ideas. So I say far, it's not far because there's not a distance, but it's with enough fogginess or cloudiness between what we take to be serious and believe to be the truth versus what's actually left when we recognize that none of those labels or stories or things we say about anything can adequately express what they are.
So what you're saying then in the example of the tree and the leaves on either side is that the leaves are not simply experiencing their own individual experience, but they are actually the collective experience of the tree. Like both scales are happening. The tree is experiencing its leaves, but the leaves are experiencing their leafiness, if that makes sense. And I really like the way that you put that. I do have more questions, obviously, because this is something that's very difficult to wrap your head around, especially when you're used to looking at things in a certain way. So, as we said in episode 1, season 1, when you asked, okay, well, you can't wave my hand, and you waved your hand. And I said, well, oddly enough, I just did. It's the same thing. The tree is waving your hand. I'm the tree. You're the tree. We might perceive ourselves to be different leaves. We might be having different leaf experiences, but we are, in fact, the awareness of the entire tree, just focused on the leaf that we are currently embodying, because we don't recognize that the entirety of the awareness of the tree can be focused on all of them simultaneously and have both perspectives of being the individual and the collective at the same time. And so that's interesting. And immediately I think to myself, well, this sounds a lot like religion. This sounds a lot like what you're saying is that we're all part of a collective consciousness, that there is some source awareness that we are all extensions of. Is that what you're saying?
Not at all, because that is just another perception. But it's a fantastic question. And it's one that I think a lot of people will kind of butt up against, that desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself. Because at first, quite frankly, if you don't have faith in yourself, that can be a lot. That can be a little bit overwhelming to recognize that you're not a part of source. You're not coming from source. You are that source. And it's not a bit of it. It's not a percent of it. It's the whole thing, getting caught in an illusion that you're just a little bit of it, that you're just a little part. But it is, a recognition that can at least, maybe you shed a layer of a belief of there's less, a little bit less of a story. But as long as there's the perception of division taken as truth, there's always the opportunity for that double-edged sword to step in, being the idea of yourself. And it's not an idea. And so when it comes to the religious conversation, that's what this isn't at all. Like we've said it many, 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 many times. Do not believe anything we say. Seriously, don't believe it. Question it, like, incessantly. Question everything that comes out of our mouth, and be willing to question everything that you're settling upon until you get to the point that you're not making so many assumptions anymore. There is a point where you're not making quite so many assumptions. And so questioning has a different tune to it. Yeah, the assumptions arise here and there, but they're a lot less frequent. So you're not really actively questioning so much as sitting in the uncertainty that's left, which is reality. That's just what reality is. And so we're pushing against anyone believing anything we say, believing us. We don't want you to, because we can't get you there. If there is any credit given to something outside of yourself, or an insight that you have, or work that you're doing, or things that you're working through, it's going to be a lot tougher to recognize that they're not divided from you. Like, you are that person. If there is the teacher student mentality maintained, that is lost in the illusion of division. So we do not want anyone to ever think of us as a teacher, or teaching anything. Or, as Krishnamurti said, just weighing things together, just discussing things, discussing the reality of how many things we have settled upon, and just the recognition that none of those things are the truth. So there's not really anything that can be like, this episode is probably the best we can do as building a sort of, not even a structure, but just something there. But religion is very much a structure, and it's like, don't have faith in yourself, just believe that and you'll be good. If anything, we're literally the opposite of a religion.
Okay. So, given what you're saying and what you've said up until now, what you seem to be implying is that in letting go of what I think I am, in accepting that I don't really know anything about anyone else, and all of my ideas about the world aren't necessarily the truth of what it is I'm looking at or perceiving. In embracing that, I'm gaining more sensitivity for what actually is, which is not divided. Is that about right?
I would say so. Yes.
Okay. So, that said, let's just say that I really embrace this mentality and I accept that no matter what I'm looking at myself, that everyone is, in fact, just one being and that we're all interacting with ourselves. Why is my neighbor George such a selfish asshole? And why does it hurt my feelings so much?
So because we are this is fun, you asking me these things. I know everyone's gonna enjoy this episode a lot. But why is George such a selfish asshole, and why do you feel bad? Because it's almost there's a lot of different things that create that type of situation. But George is very invested in his idea of himself. Just because you may recognize that you are them doesn't mean that they're going to recognize themselves in you. And there's no way to convince them of that. It has to come from them. You can drop seeds, you can say things, but communication, especially this communication, because of the amount of things we have invested in as a society, is always going to be a two-way street. I've had a number of conversations with people who are very smart. They're willing to take this to a point, and then they butt up against something they're very invested in. And so there's pushback at that point, and there's a willingness to let go of your ability to take them all the way, because they have to be willing to do that themselves. So anyway, with your buddy George there, it's his investment in the illusion that's creating that. We're now existing in a society that has not tended to the garden for a very long time. We've gotten very caught in that. And the reason that you feel bad when he acts that way is because you believe that it means something about you, which it doesn't. And we take that concern very seriously. And I'm not saying it's necessarily an easy thing to do, but there's a lot of certainty that's settled upon in that situation. Your idea of George being something separate from you, and then anything he expresses means something about you, as opposed to recognizing that it's coming from within him. People are trying to feel better, and we're confused on how to actually do that. And so we use every which way we can come up with to try and create a cessation of the suffering we're experiencing. And people being assholes and dicks and pieces of shit is just an iteration of exploring the infinite potential ways that you can try and deal with that experience.
So, what you're saying, or at least what I'm taking away from this, is that George is just wrapped up in himself, and he's not necessarily focused on me, but rather dealing with his own shit, and I'm a convenient outlet. And from my perspective, I don't have to look at it like George's cat who keeps shitting in my bushes is doing so because George hates me. I don't necessarily have to give it a narrative and think that that's the case because I'm thinking about myself, right? I'm worried about somebody not liking me. I'm assuming I've done something wrong. So that's really interesting. And then you went a little deeper there, and I'd like to back up for just 1 second because something you said earlier, you said I can't change them, but aren't they me? Or is the problem still that I'm looking at myself as the leaf? In which case, is it possible to experience life as the tree?
That's something I'm very curious about myself. I think the idea that you could change them through wrecking, you can't. Okay. So you can't actually have that experience of being the tree and simultaneously be trying to change them. You can't maintain that perspective and maintain the desire to change them. Like those things actually can't go together. That's straight up oil and water. Like it is so incapable of being the tree and having that experience of the tree, which is the recognition that you're already doing all of it, and maintain any desire to change anyone. Because in order to maintain a desire to change anyone, you have to maintain the perception that there is anyone else. You're just changing yourself. And then people will say, well, okay, well, I'm just changing myself. Okay. Why do you feel like you need to do something active as yourself and settle upon a certainty that they need to change, and how to go about that? And where is that coming from? It's coming from certainty that you're settling upon. And you can't be the experience of the tree and be settling upon a ton of certainties like that they're doing something wrong, that they should be different, that you know what's best for it. Whose perspective is that coming from? It's coming from the divided perspective, your idea of you that's going through that. But you can't maintain that desire and be the tree simultaneously. You just straight up can't do it.
So I guess the next question then is, if George is able to just be a selfish prick, but he doesn't necessarily have to be, is there in fact a better path? Like, is there any benefit to just being a selfish prick? Like, shouldn't I just be out there taking care of myself? If anything's permissible, if everything's okay, it's just me anyway. Why wouldn't I just be selfish like George?
Because in order so and this brings up a very interesting point, because so in that investment in the desire to be selfish, you have this idea that you could be more, that you could get more, that there is more to become, that there is more to attain. And you can't simultaneously recognize that you're everything and that you're whole and complete as you are, and think there's anything that you can add to yourself. That's another thing. You can't do both. If you're everything, what more could you be? If you're already it, what more could you become? You couldn't. And so in order to maintain that state of divided selfishness, like George is experiencing, there has to be a perception of lack to some degree in order to maintain that narrative and that experience.
Okay, so that makes sense. That kind of goes back to what we were originally talking about in terms of over identifying in any way typically leads to suffering, right? It's the reason I have so many concerns. It's the reason I'm suffering from anxiety. It's the reason I worry about people and how they perceive me and all of that. And so that, okay, that makes sense. You know, it's not that we can't do that. We can do that, but it creates suffering. So I like that. That's easy to digest. Are you implying then that if I'm not identifying, I'm not suffering anymore, that there's a place where I don't have to suffer, where life is just great all the time?
Um, no and yes. Like I'm starting with no because that from this perspective, I think that's I don't know, just whatever story I'm making up in my head is a better one to hear first. Because your idea of that experience without so much weight isn't the reality of what it is. Your desire to, this is what people get caught in trying to be enlightened, that whole story of enlightenment and just getting to a place where everything is magical and there's unicorns and sunshine and rainbows and everything's just hunky dory all the fucking time is just a story that you're telling yourself, is just an idea. The reality of that experience, the reality of whatever, people call it enlightenment, the reality of that is a cessation of the ideas, of the stories, of the thought that you could even attain anything. And so that idea of enlightenment where everything is always amazing may be eventually an experience that you're closer to, but it's not going to be an experience you get to through striving for an idea of what you think it is. Because even in that, the striving to be in that spot, in that experience, is not where you're at. You are where you are always. And your desire to be somewhere else and your desire to be at peace, to be enlightened, is going to create more suffering because that's then you experiencing that, thinking you should be somewhere else. And so now there's a gap between where you are and where you think you should be, what you think you should be experiencing, and all of those things. And all of those are just going to add to the suffering. So that experience of where everything is a little bit lighter isn't attained through striving to be there. And the reality of the experience is not one end of the spectrum. It's not just the positive. There in order to even have an experience that is perceived as positive, there has to be the ability to have the experience that is perceived as negative. They go hand in hand, like front and the back of the coin. So there isn't necessarily a state in which you don't experience all ends of the spectrum. And if you take that far enough, it's not something you would want. Trust me, if you spend some time thinking about what that experience would actually be like, you'd probably come back to wanting to experience a little bit more of that spectrum. And so the experience of whatever your idea is still involves the entire spectrum. It's just without so many hard dips, maybe. The lows don't seem quite as low and the highs don't seem quite as high just because it's a difference in the experience. There isn't so much investment that keeps fluctuating up and down that means so much about you all the time. And that's just the shift is things don't mean so much about you, but it doesn't take you into a different realm than the place that you're at. Like you're still here now. It's like the example we used in a episode recently was it's like going from looking through a straw to not looking through a straw so much anymore. So it's still you're still in the experience here now. You are here now. You exist here and now, but that experience shifts, but it's not this, entirely separate thing than where you're at now. It's just there's a lot in the way of that experience right now.
So, for someone like myself, for example, who's had a past where I really identified with my story of myself, and I went through a lot of trauma and experiences that were hard as a child because I didn't understand them, at the hands of people who we've already identified were thinking about themselves and weren't necessarily aware of the damage that they might have been causing, which is just fine. But that all said, all of those experiences have led to kind of a background soundtrack to my life of self-loathing and hatred and judgment. And with that background, what you seem to be saying is that I will never be free of that, but that in facing the fact that I don't know what any of it meant about me, I don't necessarily know if it means anything about me, and eventually letting go of the fact that it means anything about me at all, that I will just stop being affected by them as much, right? So basically, it's more like gaining strength than finding comfort, which is a different priority necessarily than I would have at one point even considered, because the pain was so bad. I just wanted to find comfort. And what you're saying is that in trying to find that comfort, which is false certainty, which is always an idea of myself, I was actually making the process harder. Now, that said, do you think that there is a point where you're just so lost in yourself that you can't find your way out anymore?
No, I don't think. I don't think there's ever that point because it's always a story you're maintaining and clinging to that certainty is all you've ever known and seen. And so there's a seriousness with which you take that experience and that being deep in the pit. But it's something that you have to maintain by maintaining your false certainty that all of it means something about you and the story that you tell yourself. But even just the slightest shift, the slightest recognition, the slightest experience where there's one thing you've settled upon and you're able to recognize just a tiny bit, a littlest thing that that's not actually the truth, that can unravel everything. I'm not saying that it does immediately, but it's the slightest shift because with the story, especially when you're deep in it, everything you think is certain. Everything definitely means something about you, and you're definitely correct. And everything you believe about yourself is true. If you have one little experience where that perspective shifts in the slightest way, it can unravel everything else you believe to be the truth. And I think that opportunity is always right there. Someone's willingness to see it is definitely going to be dictated and swayed based upon how invested they are in that idea. But I do think that the potential for it is always right there, at least the potential in the shift in directions from deepening into the seriousness with which you take that story and the ability to recognize that maybe it's not as true as you thought.
So that's an interesting point, that we don't necessarily have to go to the deepest depths of this insight to benefit from the insight to any degree whatsoever. Like just even letting go of our idea of ourselves, even just a little bit, can have huge impacts on our life and our relationships and what we do at work and so on and so forth. And so that's a reasonable claim. And I have nothing to really say about that. But I'd like to go back to something that is difficult to wrap one's head around. The idea that you or I am the whole thing, that it's just me. There's a lot about that sounds like belief. It really does. It sounds like something that I'm going to hold on to and say, yes, we're all one. And then I'm going to try and see people through the lens of them being me. But immediately I come up with this problem that if I'm trying to see them as me, then there's an idea of me that I'm trying to see them through. And so I'm not sure I understand necessarily how it can all be me or how I could even verify that by trying to think about it.
So, the belief in unity is not the reality of unity. The description is not the described. The idea of the thing is not the thing itself. And this is the conversation where, someone who's pushing back a lot may respond to your recognition that the idea of the thing is not the thing itself. Well, that's just another idea. And this is where the two-way street comes in. It's pointed. Yes, I'm using words, I'm using language in order to express something, but it isn't because it's always going to be paradoxical. Like your idea of the thing not being a thing itself, saying that that's an idea, just goes in a paradoxical loop for forever. So, and that's not a thing you can settle upon. Like an idea is a false certainty that you settle upon. So the recognition that your idea of the thing is not the reality of the thing, saying that's just another idea, is not actually the case. Even it's pointing to something. And again, yes, you use language, but that's our means of communication at this moment, and the way that we can point to things that are a little bit deeper. So with that, that recognition that, or the belief in unity, it can be, I don't want to say dangerous, but it can take you further away from the reality of what it is. Like unity, that experience of unity is just what's left when you're not settling upon so many things. And one of the things people settle upon is the belief in unity. Oh, this is all me. Like even saying that is a recognition that is literally just what's left when you stop settling upon so many things. When you, and to go back to the question of, I'm maintaining this idea of me, I see everyone as me, I'm seeing everyone as this idea of me. It's the letting go of the certainty you have about yourself. Like you don't know anyone else's story, you equally don't know yours. That story you tell yourself is in no way, shape, or form the reality of what you are. And so that's another false certainty that we're settling upon. So it's just what's left beyond all of those things that we settle upon, beyond all of those certainties. So it's not something that you can believe in. It's not something that you can try to get to. As soon as you say, I have recognized unity, you're utilizing a dualistic structure, being language, in order to do so. You can say, like, oh yeah, but that's just an idea, and I'm pointing to something deeper in that. It's like you're pointing to something deeper as the deeper thing within yourself. So it's that we really, really, really don't want it to just be us when we lack faith in ourselves. But that's just what's left when you stop settling upon so many concepts and ideas.
So I can't conceptualize it. And so there's nothing for me to believe in, which leaves me where I am in the experience that I'm having and all of the uncertainty that goes with that. And so I'm left not able to go anywhere. Like I can't think about anything without somehow betraying the point of what you're trying to say here. And so I'm left with a feeling. And it's a feeling that frankly I don't like, because it's a direct contrast to what I'm always feeling in terms of living in relation to everyone else. I always feel like I live in relation to everyone else. What you're saying makes me feel very alone. How do you deal with that?
Another great question. I wrestle with that myself a bit, but it helps to recognize that even that, when you recognize one of the, call it a depth of this recognition, that it means that it's just you and you're alone. If the concern with that stems from your desire to continue to attach to the perception of division, like you're still maintaining you being alone. And it's because you're not the story, you're not the idea. So without being able to settle upon that, it's like it changes everything, because you're not perceiving yourself as something divided anymore so much, so often. but it also doesn't change anything. And that's, as overwhelming as that is, it's just the reality of freedom. The reality of reality is that it can be uncomfortable when you first recognize it. It's like being in a prison cell your entire life and seeing that the door's open, not having any fucking idea what's on the other side of that, and being willing to take that step and step through it. And that's the reality of the experience of freedom along this point of the recognition that you're alone. That's the concern is only something you can maintain through having a opinion, a judgment about it. As long as you keep relaxing into the reality of uncertainty, as long as you continue to not settle upon that, that feeling subsides. It's because you recognize that without all of the, all of the strings attaching you to everything relatively, like as those strings get cut and you're just sitting there in uncertainty, it's where you've always been. You've just created all of these strings to give yourself that sense of comfort through the false certainty that never actually existed. And so without that, it can be alarming at first, but as you continue through that and continue questioning the things that you're settling upon, the opinion of your concern about being alone, that will subside as well, because that's just another concept, just another idea you've settled upon. And that allows you to then, on top of that, create an opinion about it. And that opinion of it is irrelevant to the reality of the situation, which again isn't what you think.
So what you're saying is that I don't like being alone, but only when I'm in prison, which makes a lot of sense to me. But taking that in and putting aside the loneliness that habitually pops up because I'm so used to being in prison, there is a world that we are a part of. There's something that we are experiencing. And while you can say it's just the subjective, you can say it's just what I'm experiencing, I'm the whole. The fact is, and I know there are many different, let's say, versions of me that are suffering terribly. There is the reality of human trafficking. There is the reality of murder and war and starvation and poverty. And looking at that and recognizing that this is all me, one almost feels inclined to judge oneself or feel guilty. One certainly feels inclined to get out there and do something about this. So how do you handle that? Knowing that the very urge to get out there and do something about it is probably coming from the perspective of division, because who am I trying to impact?
Exactly. And great question, because this is something that I butt up against for a while, like about a year ago, I would say. And what helped me with this a lot was recognizing that all of those atrocities that we go through, experience, that we see in society are products. They're products of a given mentality. They're products of perceiving division to be the truth. Inevitably, there's going to be a bunch of greedy motherfuckers and a bunch of suffering motherfuckers. Like when one end of the spectrum goes super far, the other end is going to balance it out inevitably. So the reality of those situations is that they are both products of a mentality. It's as if that tree example I was using before, with the sun on one side and the shade on the other. Say everyone who's greedy and rich is in the sun, basically, and everyone who's suffering is in the shade. So if you focus on the atrocities, it's like you're going around looking at the leaves of the tree, not recognizing that it's coming from something. It's coming from a root. It's coming from that perception of division, because as we get lost in it on the side of greed and whatnot, thinking having more means more about me, there's not going to be much left for those who are in that state of suffering. As long as someone on one end, say the sex trafficking atrocities, thinks they, you know, need that from someone in order to feel better. Basically, there's going to be those that get caught in that sort of experience of it. And it all comes back to the perception of division taken as truth, the idea of ourself we believe to be the truth. Those are all products of it. So even even the frustration and the desire to change the leaves isn't actually doing the things that you think it is. It is to an extent, but if you just keep snipping leaves, they're going to keep growing. Inevitably, you have to look at the root, and you can't simultaneously focus a lot of attention on the leaves and a lot of attention on the root. Sure, you can keep some attention on leaves, but the reality of what's going to shift it is the root, is looking at that perception of division in the fucking face and recognizing it for what it is in yourself. It's not about pointing at someone else and being like, recognize unity, stop, change, basically. And because that's you investing in that root, the perception of division. Again, like, it's a tricky motherfucker, and it there is a fine line to walk between getting out there and changing the world and just changing yourself and recognizing that that is changing the world so much more than you can possibly imagine, because this recognition is another tree. It's a different tree. And we've been so caught in the tree of perception of division and looking at that and looking at the leaves, seeing some leaves like, I want to be those leaves. We should help those or change those leaves and shift that experience. But as long as it's you maintaining the idea of yourself and acting in whichever side you fall upon, you're giving water to that tree, watering the roots of that tree that is creating the leaves that are both in the extreme poverty and suffering and all of the atrocities and, the all of the greed and all that shit on the other end. And so you can't simultaneously look at that and let go of that perception of division in yourself. And if you actually want to shift things, it has to be a focus on your mentality here and now. And so, as much as it seems fucking like contradictory to let go of that attachment and the suffering you're experiencing because of the suffering you perceive other people to experiencing, you're actually reinforcing and adding to everything that's fueling that experience of suffering in this reality that's just you.
Man, there's so much that goes into what we're talking about right now. But I think the biggest thing is that these atrocities, the system that's kind of grown up that allow these atrocities to happen, is very much based on the illusion of who we think we are and all of the need and desperation that goes along with overinvesting in that illusion. And so it's like my perception that there are other leaves that are the problem is me reinforcing the tree's perception that the leaves are separate to begin with. And so in seeing and investing in that division, I'm reinforcing that division as a perception of the whole. And so that's really interesting. And it brings a lot of things up, including the reality of what you're saying in terms of me being what is. That means that I've always been everybody who's ever existed. Like the timeline that I'm thinking about in terms of our history and all the atrocities and everything that led up to now, that was all me. And it was all me still invested in this illusion that you're talking about. That's very reasonable to believe because we're raised in it. And so all of a sudden, it dawns on me that not only is it important for me to let go of this illusion for my own sake, for my own life, but it almost feels like there's so much more on it. It feels so much more important, like I'm changing the world. Like that feels very heavy. I feel very responsible for that. Like I need to hurry, like I'm wasting time. in not questioning more of myself, not getting out of the way. Like, this seems like something I should really get behind. What are your thoughts on that? How do you deal with that weight?
So this brings into play something we haven't touched on in this episode. We've touched on it many times throughout all of the seasons that we've had so far, but the recognition of time and space being conceptual illusions as well. And so the recognition that the only thing you can be certain about is that you are here now. You are here now. That's the extent of what you know. I exist here and now. That's it. You, what exist means, what here means, what now means, all shift, and there are depths to all of those, but no one can say with certainty anything outside of that. I am here now. That's it. And so with that concern for getting things done, getting somewhere, deepening my recognitions more quickly is again kind of feeding that tree, that perception of division through you having a sense of urgency because it's relative to what exactly? There's this assumption of relativity in everything that we do, and without that relativity, recognizing that it's all you in every moment, here and now, there's nothing relative to compare that to. And so a sense of urgency isn't isn't something that can be maintained very well because that's relative to some other means of doing things. And so through that, beyond that, even that recognition that you're not going anywhere, like that you are here now forever. No beginning and no end. And I know this feels like, where the fuck is this coming from? This is a lot. And because it is, because it's all you know. And so even because if you start thinking about the beginning, what was at the beginning, there had to be a point. Then it's like, okay, well, what was before that? Well, nothing existed. Okay, well, you just said that nothing existed. Nothing existed. So something existed, being nothing. And therefore, before that point you said was the beginning of existence, there was still existence. And so you keep going back, you keep like, well, it's this, well, it's beyond that. It was this. And we keep trying to draw lines and you can't, like, because you can keep going. But that's what our mind tries to do because it is a concept creating machine. Like that's all it does. And so that is a very, very powerful tool that we're kind of, I don't want to say up against, but dealing with. That is an aspect of the reality of our experiences that our mind likes to settle upon certainty, but you keep going back. There is no beginning. And so there is no end in either direction. And so it brings you back kind of immediately to where you're at. If you keep trying to conceptually think about the beginning and the end, you can't settle upon it. It's just something that you want to because it makes you feel a little bit more comfortable in the moment. But it again is investing in that tree that perceives division, that perception of division. And so, in terms of the rush to do things, you're just here now. You're just you here now. So there isn't anywhere else to go that isn't a conceptual idea. Well, I'm getting to tomorrow, conceptual idea. Next year, conceptual idea. Like you get there, you're here now. So it's not so much about doing things, it's just the mentality you embody each and every moment. And that shift in mentality is the watering of the other tree that doesn't take division to be the truth. It still perceives it. Absolutely. It still has the experience, but it doesn't take it as truth as we have in this. So the only thing you're doing is shifting that mentality and being in it, because that's what it is. That's the rush, is the mentality shift. And so there's no one else's mentality to change. So it's just yours. So that's the kind of the extent of what you can do and then express it. But sitting in uncertainty, you don't know what's going to hit necessarily, what the best thing to say. It's just what's being expressed. But in that mentality, what's being expressed doesn't have quite so much distortion anymore. And it makes shifts, it makes ripples, as we say very often. And so the rush to do anything is buying into the idea that there's anything you have to do outside of be yourself here and now.
So that's quite a shift again in my experience of myself, because I immediately tend to look at it as, okay, so I'm the awareness of everything. So I've always been throughout history, and I will always be going into the future. What you're saying is that it's not quite that, though it is kind of that, but rather I am existence now, and I'm constantly changing. I'm not going through time, but I'm experiencing time in the here and now. So I have a perception of a before and an after, but I'm really always just now. And that changes my relationship to everything, because all of a sudden now I see that, okay, so I'm connected to everything, and I always have been connected to everything. And if I take away the guilt and the responsibility and the self-judgment and the fear of being alone and all that other stuff, I'm still just left in my life. Like, I'm still just left here with my job, talking to people when I go to the grocery store, paying my bills and whatnot. So there's nothing that I can do to change the world for the better, as it were, because the mentality that I would be coming from in order to do that would be perceiving a problem that I'm reinforcing by trying to be the kind of person who would go out and save the world, because then I'm investing in the idea of what that saved world would look like. And I end up being kind of a dictator in the long run because, I know better. So it's such a tricky loop. Um, what do you do then? I mean, at the end of the day, what's the best thing I can do for myself?
Be yourself. And I know it sounds cliche, but it's not any idea that you have of yourself. So being yourself is just what you are. It's just what you are when you're not trying to be anything at all, because it is a tricky fucking back and forth. Because anytime you build up an idea of what you should be doing, what should have happened, what should be happening, what shouldn't be happening, you're investing in that tree that's got all the products are the atrocities. So even that, you're watering that fucking tree. And so you can't maintain those ideas and water the other tree that doesn't take division to be the truth. And so you're right. It isn't about creating a conceptual idea of what the world should look like and shouldn't look like and trying to take it from there to there, because again, that's just investing in the ideas and believing that they're the truth. Because if you maintain an idea of what a perfect world looks like, you're going to have a very difficult time not maintaining an idea of yourself that looks perfect, an idea of other people that look perfect. And all of those things go hand in hand. When we're maintaining ideas, there's going to be ideas about everything, or at least more of an opportunity to create ideas about everything. So even your idea of a perfect world isn't the reality of what it's going to be. And as long as you're maintaining that, you're maintaining the illusion being the perception of division. So it has to be just being willing to sit in that uncertainty about yourself, about the world, about what the fuck's going on, about any other people, about anything really. And your willingness to sit in that is the shift, is what's shifting everything about yourself, because it's the certainties that we settle upon that take us out of that experience and continue to grow that tree with that perceives division and takes it as truth and has all of the atrocities that we could possibly think of growing out of it.
Okay, but at the end of the day, and again, this goes back to the feeling, like I'm coming out of a dark period of my life. I'm coming out of a state where I was always thinking about myself. All of this stuff sounds fantastic. I feel better when I'm thinking about it, when I'm working through stuff. Sure, there's still ups and downs, but admittedly, like my life is worlds better now that I'm starting to take this in to any degree whatsoever. I just want to tell people about this. I want to get out there. I want to start conversations, but sometimes people don't want to listen, or they think that I'm trying to sell them something. And so it's really frustrating. How do you deal with knowing this and working on this and not necessarily being able to go and talk to people about it?
So there is a growing community that has a Patreon. It's called Dualistic Unity, and we're having this conversation all the time. Half kidding, but that is something that's happening. So if you don't feel like you have anyone to talk to, we're fucking talking about this shit all the time. So come chat with us for a bit. But I totally understand that because I continue to deal with that to this day at times, and I'm lucky that I have the ability to basically have this conversation pretty much every day with groups of people. But outside of the dualistic unity community, there aren't a lot of people willing, and there's not a lot of people to let go of their assumptions of what anything means, but your desire to get out there and shift anyone is not shifting your own. Like we use other people as scapegoats to as an excuse for things we're trying to avoid. So those other people's whose minds you're trying to convince is just you trying to convince yourself. Your need to spread this is just your need for yourself to fully validate what you're recognizing. And it's like we almost need more people, or we feel like we need more people to recognize it in order to feel sane with it. So it's that balance between letting go of the need to express it while also being like, fuck it. Yeah, it's all me. I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about with whoever I come across. And yeah, it makes some people uncomfortable. Absolutely. I've had plenty of conversations with people who get very uncomfortable with this conversation, but it doesn't mean you have to bow down to it. But where is that coming from? Where is the desire coming from? And that's not something I can tell you where it's coming from. It's something that you have to be willing to look at in yourself. Is it coming from the recognition that it's all you, make the most of it? Or is it coming from the desire to just validate the recognition in yourself? And if more people recognize it, maybe you won't feel so crazy. You almost have to be willing to look a little bit crazy in a society that is crazy and believes that it's not.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And that goes again back to uncertainty and accepting uncertainty. And I feel like it really does go back to the recognition of what you're saying, that everything that we do from within a certain mentality will have a certain impact, that there will always be this environment that goes along with identity and thinking that you are a certain thing, that there are certain rules in terms of it reinforcing a sense of lack, so on and so forth. And that a mentality that's free of that would have a completely different impact on the environment because it's coming from a completely different place. And so you could be saying the same things, but because of where you're coming from, your tone would be different. The impact would be different. The ripple would be different. And so what you're kind of implying is that it's just blind faith, that I need to be doing this for my own reasons and recognize that that in itself is going to create a different impact. And if I think about history or all of the influences that are creating this version of now and the level of toxicity and selfishness, then the most revolutionary thing that I can do is not participate in the mentality that created it, which is to just relax and see myself. And so it's interesting to me right there, because that goes against a lot of what we think in terms of how to address the world, how to fix the world, because we're never looking at where we're coming from. when we want to do that, or what our biases might be. Jesus, we never think about that for the most part because we're always trying to feel better. So there's a lot of utility in the mentality that we're talking about. But what's interesting about it is that it doesn't require belief. As we've said, if you're believing it, that's not it. It really is just a reasonable way of looking at the universe as an uncertain question, something that you're always learning from, rather than taking a stance that ultimately just leads to further suffering and division. So I would say that that's a very reasonable stance to take, and definitely a conversation that's worth exploring. This has been a fun episode. I'm going to stop playing devil's advocate now. This has just been a blast for me, I have to admit. And what's funny is that, of course, I'm just winging this. As we're going through the episode, I'm just listening to Andrew and coming up with questions and responses that I have, in fact, faced in the past, things that I've thought in the past. And so I'm well aware of all of the questions that go into this. I hope you, listener, did enjoy this episode. I do encourage you to go back to episode 1 of season 1 and go through the first 2 seasons at least, if you enjoyed all of the stuff that we talked about here, because we really do flesh it out in more detail. And season 5 is going to move along at a different pace after this episode. We fully expect to go into deeper subjects or have guests on the show. But if you're interested in what we were talking about, definitely go back to season 1, check it out. Let us know what you thought, because this conversation is so much fun. And Andrew, I got to say, man, your answers were epic.
I appreciate all of the awesome questions. This was a lot of fun. It was like, it's funny how many like sort of full circle moments we have, because you go back to season 1 4 full seasons ago, and I don't know if I would have been able to answer any of these. I would have tried, but it wouldn't have been coming from any place like I am now, basically. But it's interesting too, because I try and do kind of what you did during this episode sometimes, which is tap into that experience of being very caught in yourself, but being curious enough to ask the questions, and it almost gives you an appreciation for it. Like you're able to see it in a different way. And that's, the great thing about the Patreon calls and everything is that, especially like tier 2, tier 3 calls, is that there isn't this need to go back. Like we can keep moving, keep digging in, because everyone's kind of with it, with the willingness to let go of assumptions. And so it's interesting going through an episode like this, or on our free public calls, for example. There's a decent amount of people who join those who settle upon a lot of assumptions, who settle upon a lot of false certainties. And so the conversation kind of has to stay in this realm, as opposed to being able to fucking continue soaring through uncertainty and finding out, just continuing to find out, which has just been the process of this podcast. And it's like we've gotten to a checkpoint. It's like, all right, let's revisit some of these things, some of the foundations, some of the basics. But it's helpful. It can be very helpful to, from time to time, if you're getting frustrated with someone or how they're seeing things or whatever, to tap back into that experience, to remember what it was like to believe that every idea that you have and everyone else has about you exists in some semblance of reality. And so understanding that can bolster your experience of empathy for sure. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this. I feel it kind of feels like because these are kind of questions I get if I go like on another podcast. So it was funny Ray playing that part. But it was a lot of fun. So yeah.
Absolutely. This was definitely a treat for me. A lot of fun to play devil's advocate. And of course, I'm being more reasonable in my questions. I'm much more likely to entertain what you're saying because I've seen the perspective before. So as this episode went on, I was at various different stages of recognition and responding from there. So it was kind of like a timeline that may have taken years, but we compacted it down to one episode and all of the questions that you might go through on that journey. So I do hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as we did in recording it. Do stay tuned for the rest of what's coming in season 5. I do want to mention that there is a whole other segment that we've recorded that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this episode. Community topics. We have almost 40 community topics episodes on various different things that were voted on by the community. Whatever it is you're thinking about, artificial intelligence, long-term challenges, the schooling system, we've done episodes on a lot. And I think that's about it for today's episode. This has been a lot of fun. Andrew, I got to say, it's been a hell of a journey. 200 episodes. I'm looking forward to getting this one out there and introducing it to a lot of our new listeners. And if you are a new listener and you have been enjoying this conversation, not only should you go back to seasons 1 and 2, but definitely join us on Patreon. These conversations are so much fun. And if you feel, as I was expressing earlier in the episode, that there is nobody to talk to about this kind of thing, that's why we've created this community, because we know that feeling too, because we're you.
Exactly. This has been a blast to get back into these things, and I appreciate everyone sticking through it. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.